Hey there. I was just starting to update this map that a professional had made for me a long time ago, and I thought, what better first video than to discuss some of the lore of this world? You know, when we're playing the game and everything's going on, questions about lore come up all the time, and I thought that I would kind of give a brief snapshot of the lore in this world. Um, as with all world building, with all lore, you know, it's complicated, it's long, it's crazy, all that good stuff. Um, but luckily, in a video, it's a lot easier to kind of break that down and talk about it. So the first thing to talk about is, as many people hopefully know, the game is called The Third Era, and the reason why it's called The Third Era is because two other eras have happened already. I actually have both of those maps on my wall that I hang up, and the third era map actually hasn't been made yet. I'm hoping that when the game is finished, we'll end up making that map. And I'll probably make that one personally myself. The first two maps I actually had a professional made. They're quite astonishing and quite beautiful. You probably can't really appreciate all the details on there, all the mountains, all the forests, all the everything. But it's truly a beautiful and amazing map. And I'm pretty lucky to have both of them. I'm excited for the third one as well. But jumping into the lore, the quick and dirty version of it is in the first era. It's what we call the era of the roaming heroes. The world has lots of islands, essentially, and there are these great and powerful beings and heroes that are kind of running around doing whatever they want. It's a very Garden of Eden kind of a planet with a bunch of Adams and Eves kind of running around, except instead of things being perfect and awesome all the time, the heroes mostly just cause devastation and insanity in their wake. You know, it's that idea of they're normal people kind of running around and doing their own thing. And then there are these superheroes that just show up very Superman-ish, with, you know, our planet's fine, and then all of a sudden, here comes a demigod, essentially. And that era ends when we zoom in on an island, a very specific island. The island's called Magvale, and on this island, a great war basically happens. Long story super short, as I will probably say frequently throughout this video. There was a creature that inhabited the island that was essentially like an all-powerful ancient one. It had the ability to create anything it wanted, essentially, and a hero came to the island with very similar powers. And they basically argued and fought over who got to make this their home. Yeah, we're talking about beings like so powerful that like a continent the size of Australia is like a small house to them. Just to give you some perspective on their power. But these creatures fought each other, and in that fight, it was kind of a stalemate. So they decided to basically play a game of chess. And what I mean by that is they both created as many inhabitants as they possibly could to inhabit the island with them. So, you know, they were thinking, you know, if it's me and millions of mini-me's, then the island will be mine. They both kind of thought that. So, of course, a giant war ensued between the creations of both these like ancient old gods. These creations, these creatures that they create, is where I hopefully don't get into copyright infringement. But it's creatures like humans. So, like for instance, the old god that traveled here and started creating species. It created humans. It created creatures similar to elves, similar to dwarves, similar to halflings, and so on. The ancient creature that was living here on the island already, who had been born here, he ended up having to create other creatures similar to things like goblins, similar to orcs. And as I'm sure you're already noticing, um, this game is a fantasy game. It's very similar in a lot of ways to things like uh, Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons, because I've always had a heart for those. I started playing those when I was 12. It's been over a decade now that I've played and DM'd those games. Um, and personally speaking, this is just my hot take on it, but there's a bucket of horrible nonsense that's just totally wrong about most RPGs out there, but especially specific ones. And I wanted to take a crack at creating my own. So back to the lore. So now you can kind of see how we get this world, how we get this island, right? It has all these different creatures and races on it. It has factions and sides, right? But the specifics of the lore start here. So if you recognize this story, as Ron Swanson would say, bully for you. So it all starts with a prince, and the prince's father becomes extremely ill, and they were very close. We're talking about a magnificent king, a king that united the entire island in peace, a king that had great diplomatic relationships with everyone. We're talking about the greatest era of prosperity and peace the world has ever seen. And this man has a son. The wife dies and child labor, so it's just him and his son. They love each other greatly. He raises his son, to be this very strong, respectful, vigilant, compassionate, loving, kind human being. And everything is just so awesome all the time. And then the father gets sick. And the father becomes deathly sick. And at first they're not too worried. They're like, we'll summon the world's greatest magic users to do something about it. And it doesn't work. And they say, maybe it just takes time and natural and nature remedies. It doesn't work. And they summon, the greatest, wisest person from the edge of the earth to comment on the situation. And that person basically prophesies that he's going to die. There's nothing you can do about it. And eventually it starts to super trouble the son. The prince basically becomes riddled with grief. He doesn't know what to do. He spends all of his time becoming the greatest healer that has ever existed on the entire planet. He spends all of his time, all of his effort, all of his work just becoming the greatest healer of all time. And he does. He becomes the greatest healer of all time. And not even he can save his dad. So to back it up and say one last thing about when I was talking about those two old gods, right? You got that ancient being who lived here and the old god that visited, and they started to fight. They only worked together once ever. And the reason why was because they kept destroying the island over and over again. So they needed to have a janitor. They needed to have someone who could clean up the island, who could fix the island, who could restore the mountains, who could recreate the rivers, who could create luscious forests here and there. So they only worked together once ever, but they combined their powers to create a single creature. That creature's name is Kingal, and Kingal was essentially the janitor of the planet. And sure, he was the janitor of the planet and the island. But to put that in perspective, like I said, we're talking about a creature where it created the entire human race for fun as its kids, and another creature that could basically do the same thing. And they were at war together, and the two of them used their powers to create something. So Kingal, as you might assume, is apocalyptically powerful. His ability to just disintegrate half the planet with a thought is probably pretty real. So going back to that son, to that prince, right? You can probably see where I'm going. The prince realizes his dad's gonna die. Becomes, stricken with grief, horribly depressed. Is just blah. It's tragic, right? And he says, I'll do anything. I will do absolutely anything to save my father. And he starts to hear whispers in the back of his head. Whispers that there was a being, that there was a creature that was strong enough that would have the power to be able to save his dad, right? And he starts to listen, he starts to try to find it, and eventually he encounters Kengal. And through a series of unfortunate events, Kengal possesses him, and the dad dies, he becomes king, and all of a sudden, Kengal is king of the most powerful group of people on the largest country and on the continent. Um, and he basically just broken free from, thousands of years of imprisonment. So what does he do? He genocides everybody. He just starts killing everything left and right. His first act as king is to eradicate multiple races. He tries to completely wipe elves off the planet. He tries to completely wipe halflings off the planet. He just goes nuts. And the whole world unites against him and stops him and imprisons him in a tree. And as you can probably tell, I'm skipping a lot. But now we have entered the third era. And hopefully now you can kind of see the basics of what's happened, right? You've got this first era of heroes running around. You've got the second era, which is Kengal being back. And he's in control of like the entire human continent, which is like half of the known world. And he's just apocalyptic tyrant destroying everything. And he never took his true form, and he never, fully came back. He just, had possessed the prince, and he, changed everything forever for everybody with just that. And now we're in the third era, which is a couple years right after Kengal was bound. And who knows what's going to happen. We have a bunch of people playtesting right now who I have basically left the fate of the world into their hands because I believe in player agency, and I really believe that players should basically decide what this game's going to look like. And I'm super excited to see what we do with it. I'm going to get back to work, but I hope this little crash course on the world's lore was useful to you. And I'm going to be doing more videos about everything.